have heard Toby do these presentations several times. I have read both these reports. I've been involved in lots of discussions about the contents of these reports. So a few months ago, Julie and I were having a conversation and he mentioned, oh, I've just read this really interesting report. And I said, oh yes, I love that work. And then he said that he wanted to do an event about it. So what I'm going to try and do is in the next 25 minutes or so, summarise the content of these two reports and give you a flavour of what they say. But I would recommend reading them both. The first one, and I've said this to Toby's face, so he won't mind me saying it in public, is quite academic, uses quite a lot of academic language, but bear with it because there's some good stuff in there. The second is much more practical, and I liked a lot more because it actually said how do we start going about making the change to this new way of working. So we'll try and tell the story of their thought process and where they've gone to with these two reports. So the first one is called A Whole New World, Funding and Commissioning in Complexity. And these are my 3 points of summary really, that the world is complex and therefore we need to embrace it. We can't ignore the fact that the world is complex. It makes very clear statements that outcomes-based commissioning and performance management makes it harder to produce good outcomes. So what they're saying is basically the way that we've been doing stuff for a number of years, which is we'll give you some money, you'll tell us what outputs you'll produce from that money, you'll tell us what outcomes you'll produce from that money, and everyone goes away happy, isn't working and is broken, and there is a better way of doing things. And the third point is around how systems, it's the system that actually produces outcomes. So this idea of funding an organisation to produce an outcome at the end of the project. And there's lots of other factors that also play into that. So those are the 3 main points. So in terms of complexity, they say that we need to understand the fact that people are complex. I'm complex, you're complex. A lot of the people that we work with in the voluntary and community sector have particularly complex lives and needs. Issues are very complex. I think of homelessness. It's not just about the fact for a lot of people that they haven't got anywhere to live. There's quite often mental health factors, drug addiction factors, family breakdown factors. So it's those sorts of things. You can't just look at an issue and how you deal with an issue in a very straightforward way. And leading on from both of those things, as I've said before, systems are complex. And so what they're saying is we need to embrace this fact. We can't ignore it, we need to embrace it. And this kind of jars against another aspect of human behaviour really, in that we like to control things. And I think commissioners and funders are particularly bad, for want of a better word for this. We want to be able to control things. We want to be able to say, we'll fund you to do this and we want you to produce that at the end of it. But systems don't allow for that level of control because of their complexity. So this is one of Toby's favourite slides and one of my favourite slides as well. So this is the systems map of obesity. These are all the factors that determine whether or not somebody is obese. So, you might do some funding, let's have a look here, around education of families, say, here. But all these other factors are playing into that. So how can the funding or commissioning that you're doing here actually, how can you say that the outcome from that is determined by your funding or your contract when all of these other factors are in play? So that's just obesity. There'll be a similar map for homelessness, there'll be a similar map for children in care, all sorts of things. And quite a lot, as you will know, of these things have some intersectionality. So you layer all these systems on top of each other, and my God, this is what we're trying to deal with. And yet, this is what we see all the time, isn't it? So I just that's the reality. This is how we deal with it. Put some money in here, do some stuff, get some outputs, get some outcomes. Everyone feels very happy that they've produced the data that the funder or commissioner wants to see, and we all go home happy. But what actually changes? Really, what actually changes? And so, in this first report they talk a lot about the evidence of how this way of working isn't working. The journey is long, results are disappointing. Outcomes-based performance management turns everyone's job into the production of data, not meeting the client need. So when you're driven by producing a certain set of results and outcomes and outputs, that's where your attention goes to. That's what you're motivated to produce, not the right thing for the person you're trying to help. Feel free to nod if this is resonating. Yes, people are. Targets for results frequently distort the direction of programmes. Who's used the phrase low-hanging fruit before? Diverting attention away from what the programme should be doing. This is one from the work programme. Available evidence to date suggests that providers are creaming and parking. So we'll take the easy stuff because that will give us the results that we need, and we'll just ignore the really difficult stuff because that's not going to give us the results that we need. Ofsted and exam results are another example of this, and school exclusions and all of those things. And this is the latest evidence from 2016 from Australia. They say 3 things really clearly. Outcomes contracts delivered the contracted outcomes. Well done, we'll feel very pleased with ourselves. But the contracted outcomes weren't what the people that those outcomes were being done to actually wanted. And other things got worse and stagnated because they're ignoring the bigger picture, basically. You're just trying to deliver the thing that you're getting paid for. So this is their big shouty bit. Outcomes are not delivered by organisations or commissioned pieces of work or contracts. They are delivered by the whole entire system. And so we need to start looking at the system. And then some of the findings, so what they did for the first report is went and looked at a few organisations and people that are working in a more kind of systems-based way and tried to tease out some of the commonalities. And not all of them featured all of these things, but these were the 3 things that came out loud and clear. So motivation, learning, and thinking about the system health. So the first thing around motivation is that for people that generally are working with people, motivation is intrinsic. They get up, they go to work, and they want to do the right thing. Therefore, using a carrot and stick, using reward and punishment, turns their motivation into a more transactional thing. And then every time you want them to do something, they want some reward and punishment. So it's not accepting that, human behaviour is such that we want to generally do the right thing. So why do we need to use reward and punishment? So it can actually be counterproductive. Secondly, that it's learning that drives improvement, not payment by results. And that a lot of the organisations working in this way have a positive error culture. So they try things, and if they don't work, that's as valuable as if they do work. They reflect on what they do, they measure what they do, but they do it in such a way that it then affects what they do. And finally, they have some focus on not only their organisation, but the health of the system that they're working in. So they're involved in networks around sharing and learning. They're involved in networks around collaboration of work, and also there's a great deal of emphasis on building trust and relationships. And trust, I think, is key to all of this when it comes to funding and commissioning in complexity. So the idea that you fund an organisation to do something and they're driven by the outputs and outcomes they have to have at the end of it is one thing, but generally what we have to do is not only say we're going to produce these outputs, but we're going to do it in a certain way, and the whole process has to be signed off and agreed, and it becomes very prescriptive. And this idea of trust is that you should instead be funding and commissioning the right people, the right organisations to do things, but enable them to flex and change their approach through that process so that they can actually do the right thing. So trust is really integral. And in trusting that organisation to do the right thing when the world changes, you do have to give up some control. You have to be less prescriptive about how they go about doing their work. And so the question is raised, what is a good set of reasons? How do you think I can trust this organisation? And here are some potential answers. look at how they collaborate. Do they work in isolation, or do they work in a way when they work with other people across the system? They know where they fit, they know who they need to be working with. They share and reflect and constantly change what they're doing in order to adapt to the world and what they're learning. And they also share and reflect with others so that they can do that learning together. And they use their data intelligently. So what we're not saying is the measurement is bad. Measurement and payments together can be bad because it drives those behaviours I've talked about. But data, improving what's working well, can be a really positive thing. And so we move on to the second report, where what they did is they went and did a lot more looking at organisations, funders and commissioners that were already doing this work, and tried to turn it into a much more of a kind of practical guide. So, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the criticism of the first report was like, this is all very nice, very academic, everyone agrees basically what you're saying, but how do we go about making this change? And so the second report is trying to answer some of those questions. And basically they've come up with this concept of funding, commissioning and managing in complexity needs to be focused around human learning systems, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But the other interesting thing to note is it says, the subtitle is Practical Insights for Funding, Commissioning and Managing in Complexity. The first report was just about funding and commissioning, and the thing that changed there is the researchers realised that funders can change their practice, commissioners can change their practice, but actually organisations doing the work also need to change and manage the work that they're doing in a different way, and so there's a bit more of an emphasis on that, and we'll talk about that a bit more. So again, they start with talking about why complexity is relevant. Complexity of systems gives us the outcomes that we care about. Back to the map. Everyone loves the map, just to remind you. So what are the implications for managing and commissioning complexity? No more of this, essentially. This input, output, outcomes logic model. The evidence tells us it doesn't work. And what does it require of us? So what we need to do is in the services that we're designing and we're delivering, we have to respond to variety. As I said right at the beginning, people are complex. So having a tailor-made prescriptive solution for every homeless person that comes through your door isn't going to work, because each of those people are complex, have complex needs, have complex lives. And so we need to be able to flex what we're delivering. We need to be able to adapt to change. We can't control all the things that are happening around us. It might be new funding streams, it might be a new private sector provider coming in, soaking up all the work. We need to be able to change because of that context. And we need to be able to make it part of our day job to be thinking about the system that we're working in, not just thinking about our organisation and the role that we play. And so, yes, these are the key ideas of what you need to do in order to do that. So, in terms of the first one, which is human, it's focusing on the needs of an individual, but also focusing on what strengths and capabilities that they have, rather than what weaknesses. So how can you work with this person using their strengths to help them make a change in their life? In terms of learning, it's about the role of management being encouraging learning and adaptation, so enabling your staff to take what they learn in working with these people and adapt what they're doing. So it's much more autonomy for people at the front line. And the third is around leadership. So the people at the top of the chain, the commissioners, the funders, the managers of these organisations, their role is to be a leader beyond their organisation and to be part of the health of the system, and something that Toby calls system stewards. So, a bit more about human. They talk about putting on your vest. So we've talked about variety. The next thing is about empathy, strengths-based perspective, and trust people with decision making. So there's some really interesting work that's happened in Gateshead Council, which I won't go into in a great deal of detail, but basically the staff that are working with people within this prototype have 2 rules, which is do no harm, don't break the law. And apart from that, they've got the power and autonomy to do what they think needs to happen to help that person utilising their strengths and capabilities. And unless you kind of unleash that level of control to the front line so that they're enabled to do the right thing for people, this approach won't work. And for commissioners, this means longer term funding. You have to accept that this type of work of complex environments takes time. It takes time to build trust and relationships between partners. It takes time to build trust and relationships between workers and people, and this kind of short-term fix, you deliver a contract for 2 years and we get some data at the end of it, isn't how real change is brought about. Here's a big one that no commissioner likes. You have to remove performance measurements and KPIs. What's the point of measuring stuff when actually people's lives don't change? You know, does it matter how many job interviews somebody's been to, or how many CVs that you've supported them to write, you know, if actually they go into a job and then 2 months later they're unemployed again because you actually haven't made a fundamental change to that person's life. And fund those organisations you trust to build effective human relationships with people. So Plymouth is a really good example of this work. They're always rolled out to talk about what they're up to, but in summary, they pooled loads of their budgets across public health, CCG and the council, and created an £80 million pot to work with people in Plymouth with multiple and complex needs. They formed an alliance of all the providers and gave them a 10-year contract to work together as a system to help and support those people. And the outcomes that are happening from that are amazing, because they're all in it together. They all take equal responsibility for delivering the work. The people that they're working with are the absolute focus and drive of what they do, and good stuff happens. So basically what they're saying is, if you stop worrying about outcomes as your driver and start worrying about these things, being human, learning and systems, then the good stuff will flow, because actually that's what matters. Yes, being bespoke by default, I've kind of already covered that, so really not having a prescriptive service for people. Learning. So the current view about learning is you do some bit of experiment, you find out what works, and then you do more of it, this kind of testing, prototyping, and then scaling it up. The bad news, people, that's not going to work, because the world changes. So you learn something, you start doing something, and the world changes. And if you don't look at how that then impacts on what you do, you're not doing the right thing. So learning needs to be a continuous process. There's no such thing as what works, because what works always changes. Because people are complex, life is complex, the system is complex. And so it's a continuous process of both learning and then changing what you do. And what funders and commissioners should be looking at is purchasing the capacity for organisations to learn and adapt. And what is it enabled by? Funding for learning and not results, creating a learning culture, so removing competition to enable organisations to share and work together, creating a positive error culture, and formal and informal spaces for learning. So we see this in organisations do this well, that groups of workers come together and share their practice, provide support to each other, provide guidance, and those discussions then influence the wider programme of what happens next. And using data to learn, I've already mentioned. Systems.
It's fine, Carol, fine.
So this is my favourite diagram, actually. I use it a lot. So this is kind of a basis on how you create a healthy system that works to deliver good outcomes. So you start with a group of people, organisations, whatever, and you work out what your purpose is, what are you trying to achieve. And then as a group, you do some work to understand the current system. So that's about building relationships and trust, establishing shared purpose, and making the system visible. So who's already doing the work, what are the interconnections, all of those sorts of things. And then agreeing on some principles and values, moving forward into a co-design space. And this is where funders, commissioners, providers together, the basis of having a joint purpose, understanding what's already out there, and some values and principles about how you want to move forward. And those would be the kind of things like, we want to be human, we want to learn, we want to make sure the system works well. You come up with a kind of design for the commission and how it's going to work. And then the commission and how it's going to work needs to look like this. You try something, you learn, you reflect, you redesign, you do it again, you reflect, you redesign, you do it again. And through this process, you should come up with something that's really impactful. And then you've done all of that, you then can do some embedding and influencing of that work. But you notice that it's cyclical, so you go around, because the system at this point then looks quite different. So you go around again. And in the middle is governance and learning. So yeah, take a closer look at that in the second report. So who looks after the health of the system? I think previously nobody's really looked after the health of the system. I mean, in the health system, for example, there are some people whose job it is to look after the health of the system, but the entirety of the thing is really difficult. And it's one of those things that I think everybody thinks it's somebody else's job, so nobody's doing it. And they talk a lot about the role of system stewards. And Kelly Chase Foundation have done some work on systems behaviours and what does a good system look like. So we've got some idea of this, you can kind of then work on what the role of a system steward is. So, you know, in terms of people's perspectives, people within the system, both workers, organisations view themselves as part of the system. People are viewed as being resourceful and bringing strengths, and people share a vision. That power is shared, decision making is devolved, and accountability is mutual. So there's no longer, well, my organisation's going to do this and your organisation's responsible for that. It's what are we doing together and how are we both accountable and how can we both support each other. And then participation, again, it's around the open, trusting relationships, collaborative leadership, and feedback and learning again. And the idea behind system stewards is that there might be one or two people who take this role within a particular system, but actually everybody has some responsibility to look after the health of the system. So further resources, there is this very long link here, and I will share these slides so they can be sent out to you. So as I've said before, Toby and Collaborate have been talking to lots of different people about this, and so they've set up this kind of knowledge hub, which is an online portal where people can discuss, can share ideas, share work on what they're up to, and there's loads and loads of resources there where you can find out more. If you go to khub.net and do a search for complexity-friendly systems, you will find it. That sounds lovely. Or you can just click on the link when I send the slides through. And they are setting up a website soon. And the other thing is that Toby is currently working on funding bids and proposals so that there will be some resource to actually help people make the transition. And then this is my personal. Have you read this? Yeah, this is a fabulous book.
Yeah.
Who's read the book? Yeah, great book. I love this book. This book, to me, takes all the stuff that Toby's written about and makes it really, really tangible, and takes a lot of the same concepts but makes it real, because it's about a number of experiments that Hilary Cotton actually did around trust and relationships and strength-based work with people. And it's a really easy read. I was reading it like as my bedtime book. And I never thought I would read a work book as my bedtime book, but it's a really easy read. So everybody, I say I'm on a bit of a mission about this book. Everyone buy it, read it, and then give it to a funder or commissioner that you know, get them to read it too. That was what I would say. And that's it from me. If you've got any really difficult questions, email Toby. If you've got any easy questions, you can get in touch with me. That's it, I think. Thanks.
Thanks, Carol.